Hi, my name's Dan, and this video is one in a short series of videos that I'm doing as an introduction to Blueprint visual scripting for the Unreal Engine. And in this one I want to talk about variables, and it's hoped that this video is suitable for people who've not done any or much programming before. The idea is that this whole suite of videos are aimed at people who are new, first of all, to Unreal, but also new potentially to programming. If you have done some programming, so then some of the concepts in this video will be familiar to you. So please bear with me as I try and go through these ideas for people who might be new to them. In this case, the concept I'm focusing on is variables. So what is a variable? And this is something that when teaching programming is always a kind of, one of those, how do we produce a metaphor for what a variable is? Basically, it's we've got a slot for some information. So it's something we can put some information in, and we usually give it a name. So it's usually got a name and a value. And the value can be a number, but it doesn't have to be, because we can have various different types of informational types. Let's use one, and hopefully you'll get to, by using it, you'll see what I mean. So we've got a blueprint, and hopefully you know at least vaguely what a blueprint is in Unreal. This blueprint is just this little plate that's on the floor. I should just say that this is just a standard third-person template that I'm starting from, and I've got this little blueprint called My Plate that I've created one instance of, and I'm going to double-click it and open it up. And in the viewport, we can see that we've got a little plate that you can stand on, and we've got a collision box that will then allow us to trigger things by the player walking on. It's one of the simplest ways of doing triggers and getting scripts to be invoked in Unreal, so I use it quite a lot for beginner level stuff like this. We're going to be doing stuff in the event graph as a result, and down here on the right hand side it has a section called variables, so we're going to have a look at this, and it's actually already got the components are available as variables, and these are the components in the blueprint. So we've got the box, which is the collision box. We've got the cube, which is the actual flat plate that you can see. We've got a rotating movement object, component, which is switched off at the moment, so it's deactivated, and a default scene route. So the scene route is just kind of, that's a registration point for where is the center of this object. Right. So let's add a variable. So in the variable section, we're going to click the add, and I'm going to call it counter. Now, a couple of videos ago, we started doing stuff with a counter when I showed you program flow, and I kind of glossed over what a variable was at that point. But this is a variable of type vector. So variables have different types, and this is kind of, it makes sense with a metaphor of a box to put something in. This is a box where a vector will fit, but actually we want to have an integer in here, so we're just going to go up there. So the sort of box that you might put a plastic duck in might be a different shape and size to the sort of box that you might put a computer in. And although in real life, of course, you could put a plastic duck in a box that is meant for a computer, you probably couldn't put a computer in a box meant for a plastic duck. Depends on how big your plastic duck is. But in programming, it protects you from doing silly things by stopping you from putting the wrong kind of thing into the wrong kind of box, as it were. And this is, it may seem a pain to start off with, but actually it's really useful, because it means that you will, when you have errors that would be logical errors in a programming language that doesn't have that kind of type protection, like Python, in Unreal, they become syntax errors, or in fact won't allow you to wire them up. So you'll detect these errors much more easily and much more quickly than you will in a softly typed or an untyped language. So, am I going to zoom out again? Yes, I am. Right. So we've got this thing. If we look over on the right-hand side, let's zoom back in, default value. So please compile the blueprint. So I'm going to need to compile before I can actually access a value for this variable. And a normal default value is 0. And we're going to leave that at that. So what a variable can do is it can remember something for use later on. Okay, and in this case, an integer is just a whole number. You can use negative numbers, you can use positive numbers. It does have a limit as to how high it will go. I'm not entirely sure how big that is in Unreal, but it's it's into the big thousands, and we're not going to need it that big. Control and Alt for more. I wonder if that'll tell us. Control Alt. Yeah, it doesn't. There's just a lot of blue in there. Right, okay. So we can use variables in our scripts. It'd be a bit pointless having them if we couldn't. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it so that every time you stand on the plate, it increases the number of the counter by 1 and displays that for us. Okay, so I'm just going to zoom in here, and we're going to have the actor begin overlap event. So just one thing I just want to throw in is that as you do that, you'll see all sorts of other things coming up. The one that you want is the event actor begin overlap. It's easy by mistakes to just kind of click on the wrong one of these, and we don't want these collision things, for example, down here, the assign on. We want this one, add event. Okay, so when this event happens, where we're going to use the variable and get it to print out. So if I drag this variable onto the graph and just let go, it then brings up a thing that says get counter or set counter. So it's asking me, do I want to use the value or do I want to change the value that's in this box? And the first thing I want to do is I want to use the value. So I'm going to take that out. And that looks like that little box like that is what it looks like when you've got when it's get. And I'll just show you the other one, which is set, so that's an active node, so you have to actually have execution go through that to be able to set the value of the counter. Okay, we will want one of those, so let's have that a bit later on. So I'm going to do a print string to just get it to tell us what the value is, and then I'm going to increase the value by 1. I'm going to pull it off here. I'm going to do plus, which will allow us to get the addition node, and just plus 1. In the next video after this one, I'll spend a bit more time looking at maths and some of the maths nodes that are available in visual scripting. But for now, I'm just going to take a bit read that you kind of understand what that's going to mean. So this box is going to add 1 to the counter and set the value of counter. So we're going to get a new value for counter. That, okay. I'm going to compile that and go and run. So hopefully this is going to do what I said, which is it's going to start at 0. There we are, print 0, and then 1. And so every time we go over that, whilst it's running, it will add 1 to that. So it's an ongoing changeable entity, which at the moment, well, this particular one is storing an integer for us. And we're up to 14th time that I've walked over that already. Okay. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to put a second one in the world and show you something quite important about variables, which is I'm going to go on the same one, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, can you predict what's going to happen when I go over the other one? I'm not going to give you long. Starts again at 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Go back to the other one. And that's done 5, 6. So these two instances of my blueprint have separate values in the same box. they store them separately, one for each instance of the blueprint, and you can have different values in the different ones, which is very, very useful. It can be. So just to, we are going to do quite a bit more with variables, just to show you some examples of variables, but just to hammer home this idea that this here down on the right hand side, it's conceptually or metaphorically a box that we could put a number in, and we can change that number and access it using the name that we've given it. So it's a bit like if you've done algebra at school and you had X's and A's and things representing different numbers. It's very slightly different because often you're not changing those numbers in algebra. You might be if you do a plus 1 or increment, something. But in programming, you have these entities that you can make changes to. And because this is an integer, if I add 1, that's fine. It expects it still stays as being an integer. And different versions, or different instances of the same blueprint can hold different values in the same, with the same variable name internally inside the blueprint. Okay. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom in and show you this little button here. It says variable is not public and will not be editable on an instance of this blueprint. I'm going to show you what happens if I click on it. It turns into an eye. So that looks like a closed eye. It's meant to be, and that's an open eye. So it's visible. And if we zoom out again, we need to compile in order to be able to use that. But if we mouse over that, we've still got a default value of 0. But if we go back into our world and we highlight one of these, we can now see that this has appeared in our details pane. We've got counter, so it starts at 0. That's the starting value. I'm going to mouse over this, select this one and change the starting value to 50 for this. So this has now made this variable editable in the level editor for different instances to have different values, which is very, very useful. So if we play now, the functionality should be the same, 0, 1, 2, 3, but the other one starts at 50. So it goes 50, 51, 52, 53. So we've edited that variable. Right. I want to do a little bit with some, turn these into sliding platforms using variables to show you just 2 or 3 other types of variables in a particular scenario. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off with just move both of these. Don't want that box over here. I'm going to set up a bit of parkour. So there's going to be one moving platform just here and one on about level with it, but across to the side. And I'm going to make these move away from this bit of platform here, a bit of thing you can stand on, and up towards this wall, whilst the player is standing on them. And when the player stands on them, they'll move. When the player's not on them anymore, then they'll stop moving. All right. So we're going to, this is going to involve a few more variables to go in here. So the first thing we want to know is the player on or off? And the easy way of doing that is, or we could try and start movement, go from event actor begin overlap, but that's not the best way to do it. The best way to do it is to actually make it move using the event tick action event, but to have a variable that says whether it's meant to be moving or not, which then is triggered by overlapping and taken off again when the player goes off the platform. So for this is a kind of basic on-off, and that immediately makes me think of true, false, or 1, 0, and so I'm going to use a Boolean type, and I'm going to call it moving, or in fact, let's call it is moving. So sometimes Boolean variables, you use something like is or has, And then we can change the type by clicking on that. We change it to Boolean. It doesn't need to be visible to be editable. So let's, as default, let's leave it not. It's best to leave them non-editable when you don't want some nefarious other person in your team coming along and going, oh, let's set this to be moving straight away. Oh, maybe you do want it to be moving straight away. We can deal with that later if we need to. Let's just quickly compile so that we can get access to values. By default, this value is false, but we're going to set it to true. So we're going to do a drag off here. Now I'm going to show you something else. So if you remember when I was using the counter and I pulled it off, I haven't let go of the mouse yet. When I let go, it asks me if I want get or if I want set. And I'm going to just click off to cancel that because there are shortcuts for this. So if you hold and drag and hold the control with your little finger and then let go, it gives you the get. And if you hold and drag off and hold the alt when you let go, it gives you the set. Okay, and I use those shortcuts a lot. So when the player goes on, it triggers that event, and I want to set is moving to be true. We want it to stop when the player comes off, so we're going to also have the actor end overlap, and we're going to set that to false here. So one thing that's hopefully then obvious from here is that variable is being used in, so these are separate scripts, it's being used in different scripts within the same blueprint. So the blueprint can, any script in the blueprint can access these variables. And while the game is running, whatever value we put in here is persistent, and it will keep going whilst the game's running. So as soon as we stop the game, then we restart, it goes back to whatever the default value is, which is false in this case, which is a good thing. So we've got this thing that'll be moving or not moving. So, and then I said the best thing to do is to actually do the movement based from the event tick. So I'm going to put a tick in here. Event tick, and we're actually going to use the delta seconds shortly for this. So the first thing we want to do is to check if we're moving, and if we're not moving, we're not going to do anything. And I don't know if you remember from a couple of videos ago, I did stuff about program flow, and we're going to use a branch. So we're going to test in the branch if this is moving variable is true. So if it is moving, we're then actually going to move. How much are we going to move? So this is a question. What we're actually going to do is we're going to create another variable which is going to have the speed of movement. Okay, so I'm going to call this speed. It's a Boolean at the moment, so I'm going to change that to a floating point number. And I am going to make that one editable because we might want different speeds for different platforms, different instances. We need to compile before I can set a default value, and then I'm going to set a default value of 100. Now that might sound like it's going to be really fast, but remember, Unreal works in centimeters rather than meters. So this is going to move at, we're going to make, this speed is going to mean centimeters per second. And the way to make it go a constant speed, regardless of what the frame rate is to use the delta seconds, which is telling us how long it is since the last time it did an event tick, how long the frame took to draw. So we're going to drag off that and multiply, and we're going to multiply by the speed. There we go. So what this does is it then gives us the amount we need to move for this frame. So we multiply by delta seconds, multiplying the speed, so that will give us 100 centimeters per second movement. Right, so how do we actually implement some movement? We need to get hold of the location that the platform's at, and then adjust that location by using this this value that we've got here. So we're going to do get actor location, which gives us a vector. So a vector is 3 floats bound together, and we can break this. So if we just type in break, you get break vector, and we're going to use x. So I happen to know I've kind of previously checked, but let's just prove this to you. So x is the red arrow on here, and we want to go in the opposite direction, so we want to go minus x back into here. So I'm actually going to take that x, and I'm going to go minus, so subtract that amount from there. And then we want to reconstitute the vector. I found the easiest way of doing this. Yeah, let's see what happens if I just do make vector. Male vector. Make vector. That's automatically put it in the x, so that's useful. And we'll just take the same value for y. We don't want it to go sideways the other way. And z, we don't want it to go up and down. And then we're going to set the actor location to be this new value. Set actor location. There we go. And that needs 2 things. So it needs execution out of the branch. One thing I haven't showed you yet is if you've got wires that you want to reroute a bit, if you double click on a wire, you get what's called a reroute node, which is just that little blob, and it allows you to drag that and change where the wires are. And that value's come into the set actor location, so hopefully when it's moving it will do this movement. Have I remembered everything that I need to do in there? I think so. Let's try it out. So let's run up here, and when we're on, it starts moving. Hurrah! And as we jump off, it stops moving, but the other one starts going. Except it doesn't, because we didn't land on it. Now we've got a problem, which is now it's too far away for us to get to. So what we'd really like is for it to reset when we jump off. So we're going to set up another variable to do that. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to get to remember where it started and then jump back to that when the player's no longer on. So we need another variable, and this is going to be we're going to call it initial location, and because the location changes as you move it, you can't just use the location. You've got to remember where its initial location was. But this is a vector. Remember, location's a vector, and what we're going to do is we're going to set that at the start of play. So it doesn't need to be up here, but begin play. It's just going to grab get actor location and store that. I'm just going to do a set for that and drag that into there. So that now has the initial location for any of these platforms. And then we want to do so, as well as setting moving to false when we end the overlap, we're actually also going to make it jump back to where it started. So we're going to do set actor location and drag out from the initial location for a get node and plug that in. And hopefully, hey presto, Bob's your auntie. Here we go. I'm going to try and do this parkour and jump across to the other one. Missed, but you can see that the platform actually did zoom back to where it started, so it means I can start again. Hurrah! And let's have this platform so that it's going faster. So I can change the speed. I'm going to change it to, let's go really fast, make it 200. So that's editing, as we've done with the counter, editing that variable. We've still got the counter thing going, by the way. So it's, fell off. This is where you can see my programming skills are much better than my game playing skills. And hopefully that next platform, got this problem that as you approach it, you trigger it quite high up. So I'd probably be best shrinking that collision box down a bit. And as it pushes me off as it goes through the wall, it goes back there. So in our event graph here, which has got quite a bit going on now, and we've got the 4 different variables we've used and can see the different types. We've got an integer, we've got a float, we've got a vector, we've got a boolean. Hopefully that gives you an idea of what variables are and what you can do with them. And now it's up to you to try and imagine what you can do in your own scripts and your own functionality using this knowledge that you now have. That's it from me for now.